The peace I had spent a lifetime pursuing was not a destination, but an ecosystem. It was the delicate, balanced quiet of my greenhouse, a self-contained world humming with the gentle machinery of life. It was the humid, oxygen-rich air, thick with the scent of damp earth and the faint, exotic perfume of a night-blooming orchid. After 4 decades navigating the fiercely competitive and deeply political world of academic botany, a life of chasing grants and fighting for tenure, this quiet, green, and growing silence was my life's great work. My name is Dr. Alistair Bennett. For most of my career, I was a name on the spine of a textbook, the Bennett Conservatory, a tome that had become the foundational text for a generation of botanists and ecologists. I had been a field scientist, a professor, a man who had trekked through the world's most remote jungles to find, classify, and sometimes save plant species on the very brink of extinction. But I had grown weary of the endless committees, the budget fights, the compromises. I had retired, trading the sterile halls of the university for a modest home in an upscale community called Pristine Pines Estates. My goal was not to retreat, but to cultivate. The state-of-the-art, climate-controlled greenhouse I had constructed behind my home was not a hobbyist's indulgence. It was a private, deeply personal ark. Inside its climate-controlled walls was a living library of the nearly lost. Each plant was a story, a genetic legacy I was tasked with protecting. In one corner, a ghostly white ghost orchid, Dendrophylax lindeni, clung to a piece of cork bark, its roots the only visible sign of its strange, leafless life. In another, a row of tiny, precious seedlings of Paphiopedilum rothschildianum, the gold of Kinabalu orchid, represented a decade of painstaking propagation work. And in the warmest, most humid section, under a specialized LED array that mimicked the dappled light of the Sumatran rainforest floor, sat my most sacred charge, a young, unassuming seedling of an Amorphophallus titanum, the legendary corpse flower, a specimen I had acquired through years of patient, diplomatic negotiation. This was not a collection. It was a trust. I had lived in Pristine Pines for less than 2 months, a period of blissful, focused work, before the world of men, with its petty grievances and manufactured outrage, came marching up my driveway. I was in the greenhouse, meticulously documenting the growth of a new fern frond, when a voice as sharp and brittle as frozen twigs shattered the humid peace. "This is an absolute eyesore. It looks like an abandoned, overgrown swamp." I looked up to see a woman standing at the open greenhouse door. She was a vision of rigid, artificial order, from her severe gray bob to her impeccably tailored beige pantsuit. She was staring at the lush, vibrant, and necessarily complex ecosystem of my conservatory, with a look of pure, visceral revulsion. "Good morning," I said, my voice calm. "I'm Alistair Bennett." "I am Judith Miller, president of the Pristine Pines Homeowners Association," she announced, as if presenting a royal title. "And I am here to discuss this blight. It is a flagrant and disgusting violation of our community's aesthetic standards. We are a community dedicated to neat, orderly, and manicured landscaping." The breathtaking ignorance of her statement left me momentarily speechless. She was looking at one of the most important private collections of endangered flora in the world, and seeing only a messy yard. "Mrs. Miller," I said, my voice carefully patient, "this is a private research conservatory. The environment is precisely controlled to replicate the natural habitats of these plants." "It is an unkempt jungle," she snapped, her eyes narrowing. "And it is a health hazard. The humidity, the decay. It is a breeding ground for pests and fungus." I worked for years with the State Nature Conservancy, trying to create a true, pristine, and managed natural preserve in this valley. This chaotic mess is an insult to that ideal. This is not nature, it is neglect. Her backstory, revealed in a flash of bitter resentment, was the key. This was not about a simple aesthetic disagreement. My successful, thriving, and yes, chaotic ecosystem was a personal affront to a grand vision of nature that she had failed to realize. "This is your one and only warning. Dr. Bennett," she said, her use of my title a clear, condescending mockery. "Clean this up, manicure it, make it presentable. If I receive one more complaint about the unsightly state of your jungle, you will be hearing from the board in a formal and expensive capacity." She turned and marched away, a self-appointed guardian of sterile, lifeless order. I looked around my greenhouse, at the rare, beautiful, and fragile lives I had sworn to protect. I had built this ark to save them from the indifference of the world. I had never imagined that their greatest threat would come in the form of a woman who saw the very essence of life itself as a violation. Judith Miller's war against my conservatory began as a relentless siege of paper. The violation notices, printed on heavy, oatmeal-colored cardstock that seemed to embody the very beigeness of her worldview, became a regular feature in my mailbox. Each was a new and more creative interpretation of the HOA's bylaws, a clear indication that her goal was not compliance, but my complete and utter surrender. The first fine, for $300, was for the greenhouse being an unapproved ancillary structure. I responded with the patient, methodical rigor of a scientist preparing a research paper. I sent the board a thick folder containing the greenhouse's full architectural blueprints, the original city building permits, and a letter from the contractors who had built it. I was trying to overwhelm her with facts. Her response was to ignore the facts and issue a second fine, this time for the greenhouse's height, which she claimed violated the community's 8-foot limit for garden structures. To classify a state-of-the-art, 12-foot-high research conservatory as a garden shed was a legal fiction of breathtaking audacity. But it was clear she was not operating in a world governed by logic. It was during this initial phase that I began to understand the true, pathetic depths of her motivation. I saw her one evening in her own yard, a landscape of such perfect, manicured sterility that it looked like it had been rendered on a computer. It was a chemical green lawn, a few perfectly spherical, non-native shrubs, and a row of funereal cypresses. There was no life, no chaos, no beauty. It was a landscape of absolute, joyless control. I later learned from a talkative neighbor that her failed Nature Conservancy project had not just been a disappointment. It had been a public humiliation and a significant financial loss for her family. Her husband, a quiet man who seemed to have retreated into a world of his own, had never forgiven her for it. The pristine pines. HOA was her consolation prize, her own tiny, manageable kingdom, where she could finally impose the perfect, sterile order she had failed to create on a grander scale. My greenhouse was the wilderness she could not tame, a vibrant, living rebuke to her own failure. The fines continued, each one a new front in her petty war. I was fined for the unsightly condensation on the glass, a necessary sign of the tropical humidity within. I was fined for my custom-blended, nutrient-rich mulch, which was not one of the 3 board-approved, dyed red decorative mulches. My regular video calls with Dr. Kenji Chen, my old friend and the director of botany at the Smithsonian, became my lifeline to a sane and rational world. "She's complaining about your mulch composition," he asked, his face a mixture of disbelief and pity. "Alistair, You are the man whose research on the symbiotic relationship between mycorrhizal fungi and orchid roots is being used to lobby for changes to the CITES Treaty in Geneva. Your work in that greenhouse is having global policy implications. And you are being harassed by a woman who is afraid of natural mulch. The situation is challenging. Kenji, I admitted. The understatement, a testament to my own exhaustion. Be careful, my friend, he warned. A wounded ego is the most dangerous predator in the suburban jungle. Don't let her distract you. The work you are doing, preserving the genetic heritage of those plants, it is more important than her petty rules. His words were a necessary reminder of the stakes. I was not just fighting for my own peace and quiet. I was fighting for the silent, living things in my care. This realization prompted me to make a significant concession. I sent a formal letter to the board, offering to install a decorative lattice screen around the base of the greenhouse to make it more aesthetically pleasing. Her response was a new fine for the unapproved architectural embellishment I had just proposed. It was then that I finally, truly understood. There was no compromise to be found. There was no concession that would appease her. Her goal was not to make me comply. It was to make me leave. My very presence, the quiet success of my beautiful, thriving, living world, was an intolerable insult to her. This was a zero-sum game, and I was beginning to realize that if I wanted to save my ark, I would have to be prepared to sink her ship. My failed attempts at appeasement had only served to convince Judith that I was a man who could be bullied. My compliance was a weakness she was determined to exploit. Her campaign of bureaucratic harassment escalated into a series of covert, physical attacks, deniable acts of sabotage in the dead of night designed to cripple my conservatory and the fragile lives within it. The first physical assault was an attack on the greenhouse's life support system. I woke one morning to a feeling of profound wrongness. The air in my house felt different, drier. I looked at the remote environmental monitor I kept by my bed. The humidity level inside the greenhouse had dropped to a catastrophic 20%, and the temperature was climbing to a dangerous level. I ran outside. The cause was simple and sinister. The main water valve for the greenhouse's automated misting and irrigation system, located on the side of my house, had been shut off. It was a simple, untraceable act, a prank, a mistake by a meter reader, entirely deniable. But I knew. It was a deliberate, calculated attempt to desiccate the delicate tropical plants, to turn my rainforest into a desert. I spent the rest of the day in a frantic state of triage, manually misting the most sensitive orchids and ferns, my heart pounding with a cold, protective fury. A few more hours, and I would have lost years of work. She hadn't just turned off a tap. She had tried to commit an act of mass murder against a collection of priceless, endangered species. That evening, the patient, academic doctor, Bennett was replaced by a more pragmatic and strategic version of myself. I installed a network of high-definition, low-light security cameras. They were discreet, their tiny lenses hidden in the natural features of my home and garden. The act of turning my sanctuary into a surveillance state felt like a profound personal failure, a concession that the ugliness of the human world was inescapable. But she had left me no choice. A week later, after I had stabilized the plants and installed a locking, tamper-proof cage around the water valve, she struck again. This time, the attack was more direct and more poisonous. I was performing my morning rounds when I noticed a faint, acrid chemical smell near the greenhouse's primary air intake vent. On the ground, in the decorative gravel bed beside the vent, was a dark, wet patch. Lying in the nearby bushes was an empty container of a powerful, commercial-grade herbicide, the kind used to kill everything down to the roots. She had poured poison at the very spot where my conservatory breathed. A slightly stronger breeze, a slightly less careful pour, and the toxic fumes would have been sucked directly into the closed ecosystem. A chemical nerve agent that would have annihilated every plant in a matter of hours. I stood there, the empty plastic container in my hand, my heart a cold, hard stone in my chest. This was no longer a game of bylaws and social pressure. This was an attempt to destroy my life's work. I did not call the police. I knew it would be useless. She would deny it, and the evidence was circumstantial. Instead, I collected a sample of the contaminated gravel. I took it to my private laboratory in the basement, a sterile, quiet room that was my other sanctuary. I spent the afternoon running a full analysis on the sample with my gas chromatograph. I isolated the herbicide's active ingredients, its unique chemical markers. I created a full, detailed spectrographic report on the poison. It was a chemical fingerprint, unique and undeniable. Then, I reviewed the security camera footage, and there she was. The camera I had hidden in a birdhouse captured the entire act in crystal clear, infrared detail. It showed Judith, her face a mask of grim determination, creeping along the side of my house at 2:17 a.m. It showed her unscrewing the cap, her movements furtive and guilty. It showed her deliberately and carefully pouring the poison onto the gravel. I saved the video file and the spectrographic report to a secure, encrypted, and cloud-based server. I now had her. I had irrefutable scientific proof of her criminal actions. My first instinct was to release it, to unleash the full force of the law and public opinion upon her. But the scientist in me, the man who had spent a lifetime in the patient, methodical collection of data, held back. This was my trump card. This was the final, devastating piece of evidence. And a true strategist does not play his winning card until the game is on the line. I would wait. I would let her continue her war, unaware that I now possessed the power to not just defeat her, but to utterly and completely erase her from the board. Having failed to physically destroy my conservatory, Judith retreated to a battlefield where she was the undisputed master, the court of public opinion. She launched a campaign of slander on the Pristine Pines Estate's private Facebook page, a digital echo chamber where her every pronouncement was treated as gospel. Her strategy was to reframe the conflict, to twist my scientific sanctuary into a source of fear and revulsion. Her posts were masterpieces of malicious insinuation. "Dear neighbors," one began, "as your HOA president, I feel it is my solemn duty to address a growing health and safety concern. The unkempt, overgrown jungle on Elm Street is not just an eyesore. It is a potential biohazard. The extreme humidity and decaying plant matter are a perfect breeding ground for pathogenic molds and fungal spores, which can become airborne and pose a serious risk to those with asthma and other respiratory conditions. The board is taking this threat very seriously." She had transformed my clean, vibrant, and life-sustaining ecosystem into a festering pit of disease. The comments from her followers were a predictable chorus of manufactured panic. "Thank you for your vigilance. Judith, I thought my allergies had been worse this season. This is terrifying. Can the county do something about it?" A few weeks later, she escalated her attack, moving from vague threats of mold to specific, targeted lies about the plants themselves. A word of caution to all parents. She wrote, "I have been advised by a source that some of the highly unusual exotic plants being cultivated in the greenhouse on Elm Street are, in fact, dangerously toxic. Please, for the safety of your children and pets, Do not allow them to wander near that property. We are dealing with a potential garden of poisons in our midst. The effect of her campaign was a slow, creeping social quarantine. Neighbors who had once been politely distant now looked at me with genuine fear. I was at the local post office when a woman from my street physically recoiled when I reached for the door, pulling her young child behind her, as if I were contagious. My internal conflict was a quiet, agonizing storm. My scientific mind screamed at me to refute her lies with facts, to write a detailed, point-by-point rebuttal. But my pragmatic side knew it would be futile. In the echo chamber she had created, my facts would be dismissed as the self-serving lies of a villain. It was during a call with Kenji at the Smithsonian that my path forward began to clarify. I was explaining the situation, my voice heavy with a weary frustration. She's a master of propaganda. Kenji. She has successfully branded me as a mad scientist who is going to poison the neighborhood children. Then, you must stop fighting her on her terms. Alistair, he said, his voice firm and clear. You cannot win a war of lies with facts. You must win it with a truth so powerful it makes her lies irrelevant. He paused. Speaking of which, the delegation from Brazil is using your monograph on Cattleya walkeriana, propagation, as the centerpiece of their argument at the CITES Treaty Conference in Geneva next month. Your work, the work you are doing in that very greenhouse she is slandering, is directly influencing global conservation policy. You are not just a gardener, my friend. You are a player on the world stage. His words were a jolt of perspective. I had been so focused on the local, petty conflict that I had lost sight of the bigger picture. My work was important. It had real-world, global significance. I decided to make one last, desperate attempt at peaceful, rational outreach. I bypassed Judith's censored forum and sent a polite, carefully worded letter to every household in the community. I introduced myself, explained my work in the simplest terms, and calmly refuted the lies about health hazards. I ended the letter with an open invitation to a guided, educational tour of the greenhouse. The response was a single, angry email from Judith, accusing me of harassing the community and violating the privacy of our residents. Not a single other person replied. She had successfully intercepted and neutralized my attempt at dialogue. I sat in my silent house, the unopened letters of reply I had hoped for, now a testament to my failure. Kenji was right. I could not fight her on her terms. The time for letters, for facts, for reasonable debate was over. She was about to make her final, decisive move. And my response, I now knew, would not be a letter. It would be an event. It would be a truth so undeniable and so public that it would vaporize her entire, carefully constructed reality. Judith's final, decisive move was exactly what I had anticipated, but it was executed with a level of legalistic viciousness that still managed to shock me. Having failed to find a sympathetic ear at the federal level, she fell back on the local authorities she knew she could manipulate the county health department. She filed a formal, public health complaint that was a masterwork of paranoid fiction, a document designed to be the legal and political spearhead of her final assault. The official order to inspect arrived by certified mail, a document thick with a sense of its own importance. The complaint, a copy of which was attached, was a greatest hits compilation of all her previous lies, now presented as the sworn testimony of a concerned citizen. It claimed my greenhouse was a public health nuisance, a breeding ground for pathogenic molds and bioaerosols that were causing a documented cluster of respiratory illness in the neighborhood. It alleged that I was cultivating unsecured, highly toxic flora that posed a clear and present danger to the children of pristine pines. The order stated that a senior county health inspector would arrive at my property at 10:00 a.m. on the following Tuesday to conduct a full, unrestricted inspection. It further stated that if the inspector found evidence to support the complaint, they had the authority to issue an immediate quarantine order, to confiscate and destroy any hazardous biological materials, and to recommend the facility for immediate, compulsory demolition at my expense. This was her checkmate. It was a direct, existential threat to my life's work. The idea of a county-appointed decontamination crew, armed with bleach and chainsaws, let loose in my conservatory, was a vision of almost unimaginable horror. They would destroy a living library of priceless, critically endangered species, a genetic ark that held the last hope for so many plants. In that moment, as I held the legal order in my hand, my long and agonizing debate about how to respond came to a quiet, clear, and final conclusion. I had spent months trying to be the man I wanted to be, the quiet, retired scholar, a man of peace and reason. I had resisted the urge to use the power and influence of my past, to pull the strings that my name and reputation afforded me. I had wanted to win this fight on a level playing field, to prove that truth and reason were enough. But I now saw the flaw in that noble ideal. The playing field was not level. I was facing an opponent who did not believe in truth, who did not respect reason, who was willing to invent her own reality and use the force of law to impose it on others. To continue to fight her with one hand tied behind my back was not a moral stance. It was a form of suicide. I looked at the photograph on my wall, a picture of me and my team in Borneo, celebrating our discovery of a new, incredibly rare species of pitcher plant. I remembered the joy of that moment, the sense of contributing something beautiful and permanent to the world's knowledge. That was what she was threatening to destroy. My duty was no longer to my own principles of non-engagement. My duty was to the plants, to the work, to the very idea of scientific truth. I did not call a powerful friend at the Department of the Interior. I did not leak the video of her crime to the press. My plan was more subtle and, I believed, more just. It was a plan that relied not on overwhelming force, but on a profound and deeply held faith in the system itself, a faith in the hope that a true professional, a fellow man of science, would be able to distinguish between a lie and the living, breathing truth. I spent the next week in a state of quiet, focused preparation. I did not prepare a legal defense. I prepared an exhibition. I meticulously groomed every plant. I polished every pane of glass. I created small, museum-quality labels for the most important species, detailing their scientific names, their conservation status, and their native habitats. I was not preparing for an inspection. I was setting a stage for a revelation. The health inspector was scheduled to arrive at 10:00 a.m. I knew Judith would be there to witness my downfall. She was the final, crucial variable in my experiment, and I was about to test the hypothesis that the single most destructive force in the universe is a small, petty mind, confronted with a truth it cannot comprehend. The morning of the inspection dawned bright, clear, and deceptively calm. At precisely 9:55 a.m., Judith Miller's beige sedan glided to a stop at the curb across the street, a predator taking up its observation post. She had brought two of her board member cronies with her, and they stood on the sidewalk, a small, smug tribunal, their arms crossed, their faces alight with the righteous certainty of the truly ignorant. They were here to watch my world be condemned. At exactly 10:00 a.m., a modest, white Ford sedan, with the county seal on its door, pulled into my driveway. A man in his late 30s stepped out. He was dressed in a neat, professional polo shirt and khaki pants, and he carried a heavy-duty clipboard and a large satchel. He had a kind, intelligent face and a calm, observant demeanor. This was the man who would be either my executioner or my savior. I met him on the front path. "Mr. Davis," I asked, extending a hand. "That's me," he said with a friendly, professional smile. "And you must be Dr. Alistair Bennett. I'm here to follow up on a formal complaint." He lowered his voice slightly. "I have to say, Dr. Bennett, when your name came up on the work order, I did a little preliminary file review. I'm a great admirer of your work, sir. It's an honor to meet you." Before I could respond, Judith and her two acolytes marched up my driveway, her face a mask of grim, official concern. "Mr. Davis," she said, her voice ringing with a self-important authority. "I am Judith Miller, the HOA president. I filed the complaint on behalf of the concerned residents of this community. I am here to ensure you have full, unrestricted access, and to point out the specific and egregious health hazards." Mr. Davis's friendly expression tightened almost imperceptibly. He looked at her, his face now a mask of professional neutrality. "Thank you for your concern, Mrs. Miller," he said, his tone perfectly level. "My inspection will be quite thorough. Please, feel free to observe from a safe distance." I led the small, tense group around to the back of the house, to the greenhouse. Judith immediately launched into her prepared monologue, her voice a loud, carrying narration of her imagined horrors. "As you can see, Mr. Davis," she began, gesturing wildly at the lush, vibrant interior, "the facility is a disgusting, swamp-like environment. The rampant humidity is a breeding ground for toxic black mold, and the noxious, allergenic pollens from these alien plants are a clear and present danger to our children." Mr. Davis did not seem to be listening to her. His attention was completely and utterly captivated by the greenhouse. He walked slowly toward the glass, his eyes wide with a look of profound, almost reverent awe. His professional demeanor was melting away, replaced by the pure, unadulterated excitement of a true enthusiast. He stopped and pointed at a magnificent, blooming orchid. "Is that Apophyopedilum rothschildianum?" he whispered, his voice filled with wonder. "My God, I've never seen one in person." He ignored Judith's sputtering and began to conduct his inspection. But it was not the inspection of a health official looking for hazards. It was the inspection of a botanist discovering a lost world. His questions to me became increasingly specific, a rapid-fire exchange between two professionals speaking the same esoteric language. "Is that a custom HEPA filtration system on your primary air intake?" he asked, pointing to the vent Judith had tried to poison. "It is," I replied, "with a secondary UV sterilization stage." "And are you using a biological pest control with Cryptolemus montrosieri for the woolly aphids on the cycads?" "I am," I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. "They're remarkably effective." He shook his head in amazement. He turned to Judith, his face now a mask of cold, professional anger. "Mrs. Miller," he began, his voice now loud and official, "for the past 30 minutes, I have been conducting a comprehensive health and safety inspection of this facility, based on the very serious allegations in your formal complaint." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "Based on my inspection, my official finding is that your complaint is not only completely and utterly without merit, but that it is a flagrant and malicious misrepresentation of the facts. This is not a public health hazard. It is a world-class, state-of-the-art botanical research conservatory that is being operated at a standard of safety, cleanliness, and professionalism that exceeds most university and government facilities I have ever had the privilege of inspecting. The only public health hazard I have identified here today, Madam, is the malicious filing of a false report to a government agency, an act which I am legally and ethically obligated to document in detail in my final report. He had not raised his voice, but his words were a quiet, devastating thermonuclear detonation. Judith stood frozen, her mouth hanging open, her face a pale, horrified mask of catastrophic disbelief. Her entire case, her entire world, had just been professionally, methodically, and officially annihilated. After Judith and her cronies had slunk away in a state of stunned, humiliated defeat, Mr. Davis turned back to me, his professional demeanor softening once more. "Dr. Bennett," he said, a look of genuine embarrassment on his face. "Now that the official business is concluded, I hope this isn't too forward, but—" He reached into his satchel and pulled out a worn, heavily used copy of my textbook, The Bennett Conservatory. "I was a student of yours," he said quietly. "Not in a classroom. But I studied this book in college. It's the reason I have this career. It would be a profound personal honor, sir, if you would consider signing it for me." I took the book from his hands. The moment was a quiet, perfect, and deeply satisfying victory. The authority she had summoned to destroy me had instead asked for my autograph, and in that simple, humble request, my peace was finally and truly won. The official report from the county health department was a work of art. Mr. Davis, in his dry, bureaucratic prose, did not just exonerate me. He celebrated my work. He described the greenhouse as a priceless biological treasure and a site of significant scientific and educational importance. He concluded by formally documenting the malicious and unfounded nature of Judith Miller's complaint, and recommended that the district attorney's office investigate her for the crime of filing a false report. Judith's world did not just collapse. It was systematically dismantled. The story of her spectacular public humiliation, the tale of the HOA president, whose own summoned expert had asked her victim for an autograph, became a local legend, a delicious piece of gossip that spread through the community like wildfire. She was a laughingstock. The HOA board, terrified of the public relations nightmare and the very real threat of a massive lawsuit from a man of my international standing, turned on her with a vengeance. She was unceremoniously stripped of her presidency. A forensic audit of the HOA's finances, demanded by the very residents she had duped into supporting her crusade, uncovered a long history of embezzlement and financial mismanagement. Faced with social ruin, a civil suit from her own community, and a criminal investigation by the DA, she and her husband sold their house at a fraction of its value and vanished from Pristine Pines, leaving behind nothing but the wreckage of her own making. My life, which had been a quiet but lonely exile, was transformed. The community, now aware that they were living next to a scientific legend, became my fiercest protectors. The local university established a formal partnership with me, sending their brightest botany students to my greenhouse for internships and research projects. My isolation was replaced by a new, vibrant sense of purpose. I still spend most of my days in the warm, humid air of my conservatory, but I am rarely alone now. I am usually surrounded by a small, eager group of young scientists, their faces alight with the wonder of seeing a plant that exists nowhere else on Earth. I am no longer just a preserver. I am a teacher. My ark is no longer a secret refuge. It is a beacon of hope, a living library open to a new generation. The peace I have found is not the sterile, silent peace of a world without conflict. It is the rich, complex, and deeply satisfying peace of a thriving ecosystem. A peace born of purpose, of community, and of the quiet, beautiful, and endless work of helping things grow.